Welcome, writers, readers, and friends to the Authors Talking Bookish podcast. I'm Donna Norman Carbone, author of All That Is Sacred.
And I'm Hope Gibbs, author of Where the Grass Grows Blue.
We're two debut writers traditionally published by a small publishing house, bringing to you all the experiences that we as authors learn the hard way, so you don't have to.
We'll give you insights from the inception of a book idea to publication and beyond. And along the way, we'll share our love of books from the writer's perspective.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 31. This is So You Want to Write a Novel, Where to Begin. I am Donna Carbone, and I am joined by Hope Gibbs. Hi, Hope. How are you?
Hey, Donna. I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm great. In the full swing of school. I'm back.
Yes, and I think the first day of fall is on the 22nd in a few days.
Yeah.
And I am so excited about fall. It is my favorite of all the seasons, maybe because I'm a October baby, but I had to pull out my sweater today. I don't know if you can see it. It's little trolls. I brought out my Halloween sweater because in 2 days I put out all of my pumpkins. I'm one of those weird people that just decorates for fall.
Yeah, I do too. I put out some mums and pumpkins and bales of hay. I love the fall too.
I don't put out bales of hay, and I'll tell you why. Because years ago, I put out bales of hay, and I thought it was going to be great, and went near them, and a snake had decided to have babies in that haystack. And from that moment on, I've never gone near another bale of hay ever.
Oh, I don't blame you. That's frightening.
I have a true phobia of snakes. My cousin, I lived in the middle of nowhere, Kentucky, and all we did was ride bikes. And one day, I think I was probably 8, and there was a snake in front of us as we were riding down a dirt road. And instead of going over the snake or going around it, I jumped off my bike at full speed. And he still talks about that. So yes, maybe an irrational fear. So.
Yeah, that's traumatic.
So what have you been reading this month? What's got you hooked?
Well, you know what? I'm between books right now. I started watching a show, The Perfect Couple, with Nicole Kidman and Lev Schreiber. It's an adaptation of Ellen Hildebrand's book. So I am about to start reading that, which I will read when I finish the show. I'm only a couple of episodes in, and I'm so hooked. It's wonderful.
I'm sure this is going to come as a complete surprise to you, but I've read the book and I have already finished the show. And it's great because it's only 6 episodes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I think
I finished 2 of them. Yeah, I finished 2 of them. It's about a wedding, just for our listeners. And the night before the wedding, a murder happens, and the whole season is kind of a whodunit.
Yeah. I love Ellen Hildebrand books, and that was a departure of all of her books. She kind of added that whole mystery. This is really her first and only one that is kind of like that. But I love the show, and I think it's Dakota Fanning.
Oh my God, she's amazing.
Her character is actually my favorite character.
Yeah. She's amazing. I like her in anything.
Yeah, she is. And for me, I am reading this book called The Sisters by Nancy Jensen. And this book I think it was put out in 2011. And I was cleaning out a closet, and I had bought this book, and it's a beautiful book. I'm going to bring up the cover one more time. And it was a hardback book. And I was like, I'm going to read this, and I love it. Can't recommend it enough. And I like reading books that are not just the hot new book that just came out. I like to go back.
I tend to read older books only because I don't like reading hardcovers. So I always feel like I'm behind the 8 ball because I wait till the paperback comes out.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's just a weird thing with me, but reading a hardcover book is often very clunky.
Well, I read a lot of my books on my phone, on Kindle.
Yeah.
I read when it's on my phone, I read so much quicker. But I feel like if I have the book in my hand, I take more time. I don't know which one is better. But anyway, speaking of books, that's why we're here. And Donna, why don't you tell us about this episode that we're going to discuss?
Sure. We're going to talk about the very beginning stages of writing a novel, um, from where to begin coming up with an idea to the point where you actually start drafting the story and kind of what goes in between. Um, I don't know about you, but I'm not somebody who just sits down and starts to write. Do you do that? Or do
Yes,
you
I do.
do? Huh.
I I am completely fly by the seat of my pants when I sit
Mhm.
down. I sometimes I don't know where the story's going to lead me, and
Hmm.
so I'm kind of unconventional in that way.
Huh. Well,
I just start writing.
interestingly enough, I am between books right now. So I'm kind of back at this stage where I'm trying to come up with my idea for my next book. And honestly, at any given time, I have so many ideas floating around in my head. And so I've come up with about 5 that I think I've journaled about. And I'm trying to decide which one's pulling me just a little bit more. Where do you get your ideas for writing?
Well, again, I've said this so many times. My first book, I didn't intend to write a book. My journaling ended up bothering me, and I decided to create this character. My
Mhm,
second book idea, strangely enough, the ending came to me. I was in the
mhm,
shower, and it was
mhm,
a question I asked myself, and then I got out of my shower and I started writing. So I've
mhm.
always had the ending to that book before I had the beginning. So for me, that was kind of, that was easy to write because I knew where it was going to go. And strangely
Right.
enough, I've been stuck on the last chapter for months.
Oh, that's
But a lot of that is time management, which we're going to discuss because that
yeah.
is very important. In my third book, that one came to me as we're going to talk. That came to me as a tagline, an elevator pitch. And from
Mhm.
there, because I've already started that one's a little bit more, I would say, outlined than my
Mhm.
first 2 books. So, what
Okay.
about you?
My first book was based on a real experience,
Mhm.
and I decided to kind of fictionalize that. My second book was based on an article that I read and just kind of stuck with me. And then the third book really started with the Me Too movement. In addition to having been to workshop about past lives. And so I kind of took those 2 things and married them, which was hard to do, like in the building of the plot. Um, and for the book that I'm going to write, some of my ideas have come from various places.
Yeah.
Um, one of them is just like you said, kind of like a tagline, like I have a tagline for a story.
Yeah.
Another one I came up with, a situation that I want to write about and sort of a character's voice. So, ideas for books come from many different places. When I'm talking about this with my students, I ask them to think about the different kinds of books that they like to read, or even movies that they like to watch,
Mhm.
and come up with what if scenarios and maybe pull some elements from one and elements from another and kind of marry those together and, be like, what if these characters were in this situation? What would happen?
Yeah.
So you can really come up with ideas, seeds of inspiration from many different places.
Yeah. And one of the seeds of inspiration, and I know it is for you too, because we talked about this. For me, it was music, not in book 2 or book 3, but in book
Mhm.
1, music. There was a soundtrack that every time a song came to me that would be appropriate in that time period, I
Mhm.
would go download it, put it on a playlist that I created. And when I wasn't writing, when I was working out, and when I was in my car driving, I would listen to that. And for
Mm.
me, music was a huge inspiration. And not only does it help you set the setting, the tone,
Mhm.
but if you listen to lyrics, they can give you so many ideas.
Yeah. One of the ideas that I'm tossing around actually came from a phrase in a song. And it would be the title of the novel.
Yeah.
So there's that point. And I actually sat down and wrote 2 different songs that I think the atmosphere of the songs would kind of contribute to the story.
Yeah.
Um, So yeah, I totally get what you're saying about creating the setting and sort of creating an atmosphere
Mhm.
for characters or a plot.
Well, I was driving through Kentucky this past week. I had to go to Lexington for unfortunately for a funeral visitation,
Mhm,
and I started listening to some songs and set in the early 70s, and I
mhm,
listened to it for about an hour because I am thinking about my book 4, and
mhm,
the music in the background, I could start having a conversation between these two characters that I'm starting to develop and
mm,
create. And it was very much reminiscent of my first book, Where the Grass Grows Blue. Ironically, was named after a song title. It was supposed to
mm,
be Tangled Up in Blue. And for those you that you know that might not know this, you can name your book like after song titles, movie titles. Those are not copyright. Now,
mm.
song lyrics are. Do not include a song lyric in any book you have unless you have the the okay by the songwriter, because those are copyrighted.
Yeah.
But a song that helped me so much in my first book, it was by the Goo Goo Dolls, called
Mhm,
Name. I don't know if you've ever heard
mm.
of it. It came out,
I
I think, in
love that song.
95,
Yeah.
96.
Mhm,
And it totally changed my character. There's a lyric that says, "Scars are souvenirs you never lose. The past
mhm,
is never far." And
mm.
when I actually listened, I mean, I'd heard it, but I had never listened to it. And it
Yeah.
changed everything. So
Mm.
music for both of us has been a
Yeah.
big inspiration.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
And once you get that story idea, where do you go from there?
well, the first thing, I think one of the big things, you have to have that inciting incident or the
Mhm,
conflict. Uh,
mhm,
so for my first book, the inciting incident, the conflict happened within the first 3 pages, which is a little bit earlier in some of the books that you'll read, because as what we're going to talk, there are books that help you with your pacing of your story.
mhm,
For me, I started the conflict of a woman whose life is turned upside down in a matter of hours. When she accidentally stumbles across something that changes her life and her children's life forever. So
mhm.
conflict is one way to get that the story going. And in my second book, the same thing. I start up the inciting incident in the first chapter. What about
Yeah.
you?
I try to write a tagline, which definitely has the conflict involved in it. So, a tagline is pretty much, the character, what the conflict is, what the stakes are. So, if they don't overcome this conflict, what's going to happen? What's the result going to be? So, I do the same thing where I try to come up with just like the tightest sentence I possibly could that will encapsulate the whole of the story.
And ironically, you're saying that because our podcast, our tagline is
Yeah.
everything that we learn the hard way so you don't have to. I
Hmm.
didn't have that in book 1 because, I didn't, let's be honest, I didn't know any better. And
Hmm.
I'd already started book 2 before I'd gotten book 1 secured with a publisher. Book
Hmm.
3, I started out with exactly what you're saying, a tagline. And my
Mhm.
tagline, I have it. And it's only like 6 words, but it
Right.
does make things easier. So don't get wrapped up. You can still write a book without a tagline, as I am, here to say. And me trying to come up with a tagline of book 1 took me forever because I had this
Mm.
100,000 word manuscript and try to get it down to a sentence. It's
Right.
so hard. But
Right.
think about that you don't have to do it, but it does make it a little bit easier.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it helps you just kind of point yourself in the direction that you need to go. And if it's too hard to come up with a one sentence tagline, you certainly can come up with a summary or, a paragraph of what you think the story is about. Just I think it's important to wrap your mind around the whole of the story to
Yeah.
kind of get the idea of where it's going.
Well, let's
Um
talk about actually writing a book because it takes time. So some writers are very, very regimented. They get up in the morning and they have their morning time, they have their
mhm,
coffee, or there's writers like me. I write by the seat of my pants whenever I can, A, find the time, and B,
mhm,
when I'm inspired. What about
mhm.
you, Donna? Are you one of those routine writers that this is my path?
So I'm kind of a hybrid. There are times when I'm very routine, especially when I'm drafting the novel, that I have to write every day, almost feel obsessed to write every day until I kind of get the whole draft out. Um, During the school year, it's a little trickier because, I have so many other things going on. So time management is an issue. I tend to write on the weekends. I tend to write in the summer. And the summer is my favorite time because I like to get up, spend a couple of hours writing, and then take a shower and get on with my day.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that I wanted to talk about too is research. I think when you're coming up with an idea for a book, I think it's important to kind of write down the things that or the things that are going to go in the story to kind of find out what you need to research. For me, that means researching before the novel begins, doing the lion's share of the research then, but then, I'll come upon a scene where I hadn't researched something and I'll look something up really quick. How do you conduct research, or maybe you don't?
Well, I did. I had to do quite a bit of research in my first book because my book it goes back in flashbacks.
Mm-hmm.
And to set the tone and to set the mood, I needed to understand, what was going on, July 4th, 1976, because that's a pivotal moment in my character's childhood. I went down the rabbit hole, which you can go down the rabbit hole of what was playing on television. What day did that actually fall on? Because there was the bicentennial that year. That was huge for the country. And I also had characters that have genetic diseases. And so I had to really research those genetic diseases and all that. But with my second book, it was more like, can you do this and this on an airline? And it wasn't as much research. My fourth book will be heavily researched because it takes place in 1972.
Right.
But you have to be careful about going down a rabbit hole of research. You have to, I think that it's important to not just, I can get lost in my phone or on my computer. And as a writer, you're wasting precious moments and you're also taking away from your writing time.
Yeah. I attended a book talk with Lisa Barr, and she just wrote The Goddess of Warsaw, and she was talking about her research method. And I thought one of the most interesting things she said is that she gets all her research, culls it all together, puts it out on her dining room table, and gives herself a certain amount of time to research, like whether that's 2 weeks or, whatever the time period is. And then she stops and she starts writing. And I just thought that was a neat concept. Not anything that I considered before. I usually research. I also, one tip that I want to throw out there is when you're researching, particularly on the internet, I would always copy and paste the URL of the information that you find into a document. I use Scrivener because you never know when you're going to have to go back to that to either check the accuracy of what you're writing about or get more information. And so I do think it's really helpful to not only write down the research, the facts that you're coming up with, but also where you found them.
Well, and I think another thing kind of with research, but researching your own creativity and your mind, doing backstories on your characters. Now, I'm not saying do a deep dive into every single character who comes in your book, but your top 5 to 6, 10 characters who are your story, I did extensive backgrounds on all of them, especially with my first book, and it made it so much easier. And before I even started, and that was kind of my organic way of writing a book, I started creating these characters. Going further and further in the book, I knew their birthdays. I knew I knew who their grandmother was. I knew their favorite color. I knew, but more importantly, I knew what motivated them and what scared them. And those are things that, it doesn't have to be like a dossier. I mean, it can be just a page. But I had that in my computer, and if I ever got stuck, I could go back and I'd be like, okay, what is Bradley's motivation? What scars are in his past? And that really does help. And also, if you're stuck, it helps kind of open your mind to being creative. And that for me, writing backgrounds on all of my characters that were important, that helped me.
Yeah, I do the same thing pretty extensively. And I also add to that document while I'm writing. So if I come up with something, a new feature, about the character that I kind of need for a scene but hadn't anticipated, I'll put that on the character document just so I have that for continuity's sake. But yeah, I feel very strongly about developing a history for the character.
Yeah.
So you feel like you know them as a person.
Yeah. And also, I think another thing that helps, sometimes I'll get, not saying stuck, but
Mhm.
I've got the dialogue in my head. So instead of me
Mhm.
worrying about all the setting part, just get the dialogue out, and
Mhm.
then the story can come back around. Then you can fill it in. It's kind of like building a house.
Mm.
So, you putting up the walls, but I'm not ready to put up pictures. I got to put sheetrock up first.
Mm.
But dialogue, like my husband has walked in on me before thinking I'm by myself at home, and I'm having a conversation
Mm.
as my character. But it also helps me to talk like my character and to understand, and that's a great way of getting yourself the beginning of a book. You can always
Yeah.
come in and fluff, but if you
Mhm.
don't have the walls up, you don't have a story.
Right. I heard it said, and I come back to this quote all the time, that the first draft is a draft that you write for yourself to know
Yeah.
the story before you can really come back and craft it. And my first drafts are always very heavily dialogue.
Mhm.
Um, and then I'll kind of zhuzh around it. And I do kind of, so I don't know that I'll actually speak the dialogue, but I definitely will hear the dialogue in my head and kind of play it in my head a couple of times before I write it down.
No, unfortunately, I speak a lot of my dialogue, and again, my husband, he's like, "Who's here?" I'm like, no one. You didn't hear anything. I think that was a TV." So,
You know what I will do sometimes is make the facial expressions that I'm trying to describe, just so
yeah,
I know like how it feels like on my face or my body.
I will act it out,
Yeah. Yeah.
because, does the character have something in their hand? Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe it's because I took a couple of semesters at Western in the theater department, but that does
Yeah.
help me out. And the other thing that really helps me out, and I keep talking about this book, it's the emotional thesaurus,
Mhm.
because it'll tell you, it gives you hints of point of view. So if you're writing, I'm trying to look at Donna right now and decipher what she's thinking. She's got her hand,
Mhm.
resting on her chin. She's got a little smile, but I don't know what's going on in her mind. I can see
Right.
what she's projecting. She doesn't know what's going on in my mind. So
Right.
that is really helpful. But if I'm looking at myself, I can go in and say, okay, she's thinking, or she's trying to create. What does that feel like? And so
Yeah.
the emotional thesaurus is a must, for at least for my writing.
Oh, for mine too. I highly recommend it. I don't write without it.
Yeah.
Especially not so much the first draft. I don't, because I don't worry about like being exactly like precise in the first draft. I
Yeah.
really kind of get out the story and it's not a good story. But the first time that I go back, I don't edit without the emotion
The first
thesaurus.
the first draft, your creativity can be stifled if you're looking for perfection.
Mhm.
And I try to be a little perfectionist in my life. I fail miserably at it. And as a writer, with the first draft, this is
Mhm.
not time for perfection. This is time for the story to come out. Everyone's first draft is not what you're going to read at your local library or at your bookstore. It is a very different book. Now the idea is there, but how
Mhm.
it's told. So don't get caught up in making sure you have the right commas, making sure that even spelling. And thank goodness for spell check, because I write through a computer. I don't do it.
Mhm.
I don't write longhanded or anything like that.
No, I don't either. I give a lot of credit to people who do.
I do too.
Um, do you do a timeline? Do you create a timeline like of the character's life or of the story?
Of the story, absolutely. It was
Mhm.
it was essential in my first book, because I had like a board, and I had pages full of, this happened, this incident happened here, this happened here, this happened here. And even with keeping such details, my line editor still caught a couple of things. And
Mhm.
so for me, and I was a television production major in college, and I loved editing. That was one of my favorite parts. And with that, you have to be very precise. So I think that
Mhm.
that helped with me. I didn't have a lot of mistakes on my timeline, but I
Yeah.
mean, you're only human, and that's something that keep a record of it, and you may never look at it again, but if you write it down, it's in here.
Yeah. Yeah. I do. I like to create a timeline of, sometimes it's the plot points. Sometimes I create, like my first book, I had a lot of flashbacks and I had 5 characters. So I was trying to figure out, like, I was trying to keep track of their timelines and how they sort of, merged with one another's.
Well, Donna, we are right at our time limit. And I feel like we could make another podcast just about this. But anyway, why don't you tell us about our Do Now, as you're our teacher? What is our Do Now?
Sure. So our Do Now is really just to kind of come up with some kind of an idea, write a tagline or a summary for it. To help you out with that, we do have a free download for a fiction inception worksheet, and then start working on your character bios. And we also have a free download for that. Conduct your research, create your timelines, and then begin writing. And we also have included a handful of sources that we use to inform us as to how to begin writing a novel.
And they can find that at our website at authorstalkingbookish.com. You can find us at Spotify, Apple, and Amazon. And Donna, real quick before we go, what is our next episode?
Well, before we get to our next episode, there's one thing we do have to mention, and that is a workshop that both of us are doing for the WFWA in exactly 1 week on the 25th of September. It's from 7 to 9. You do have to be a WFWA member to attend the workshop. And what we're doing is taking a couple of our best tips from each stage of writing and sharing it with anyone who attends the workshop, in addition to free downloads. And if you are watching this or listening to this after the 25th, the WFWA has a great archive of all of the webinars that they do. So you can check us out there. So if you're not a member of the WFWA and you're interested in sort of our Spark Notes version of what we do here at Authors Talking Bookish, we hope that you will become a member.
Yes, and that's the Women's Fiction Writers Association. It was an organization that truly helped me so much connect with writers, and I have met so many friends from it, but they also give you valuable information. I went through and listened to so many of the webinars. I'd already written my book, but this was the stage of trying to find a publisher. And I don't know if I would have ever gotten my book published without the guidance that I got. And it's a wonderful organization. And I highly suggest anyone out there who, is a writer. I write women's fiction, contemporary romance. It is a wonderful, wonderful place to be.
Yeah, I totally agree. You can find them at www.womensfictionwriters.org. And for our next episode, we will be interviewing Libby McNamee, who is a middle grade historical fiction writer. And she's fascinating. I can't wait for you to hear the episode.
Yeah, and she's also a founding member of an organization that we're part of on Facebook called Bookish Road Trip. We are so grateful for her leadership before we were even with them. But again, Donna, this was so much fun spending time with you. And thank you to everyone. And we'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you for joining us today. I'm Hope Gibbs.
And I'm Donna Norman Carbone. It's time for you to get to work.
We look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks with another tip from your author friends.